Hello, this is Daily Summary News. Today, we provide an in depth and calm explanation of China's newly announced economic direction for next year, a shift toward a domestic demand driven growth model. For decades, China has been known as an export driven economy, relying on low cost manufacturing and massive overseas shipments to become the world's second largest economy. But that model has reached its limits. China's official declaration that it will now prioritize domestic demand marks not just a policy adjustment, but a long term structural transformation. This direction was confirmed at the Central Economic Work Conference held in Beijing, attended by President Xi Jinping and the top leadership. During this meeting, China formally announced that the top priority for its 2026 economic agenda is transitioning to a domestic demand led model. While last year's meeting also mentioned boosting domestic demand, this year's language was far stronger, with phrases like, "We must adhere to the principle of prioritizing domestic demand," and "we must build a strong domestic market," signaling the government's determination to pursue full structural reform. The biggest reason China is doing this now is the widening imbalance between exports and domestic consumption. Despite its massive economy, China's consumption to GDP ratio is only about 40%, significantly lower than countries like the United States, at 68% and Korea at 48%. China's export heavy model prevented household consumption from becoming a true driver of economic growth, meaning that consumption has not kept pace with economic expansion. Another major factor is the slump in the real estate market. Chinese consumers have been cutting spending due to falling housing prices, rising unsold inventory, and deepening concerns about asset values. Real estate in China has long been the most important store of wealth, but unfinished housing projects, developer defaults, and soaring unsold units have severely shaken consumer confidence. Recognizing this, Beijing placed housing market stabilization at the center of its domestic demand strategy, believing that consumption cannot recover unless real estate confidence is restored. China also announced a series of measures to revive domestic demand, including government subsidies for automobiles, appliances, and electronics, as well as policies aimed at raising incomes in both rural and urban regions. These measures are not only intended to boost short term consumption, but also to build long term financial security for households. Bloomberg reported that China plans to cut interest rates and accept higher fiscal deficits to roll out aggressive stimulus measures, signaling a full scale government led effort to revive economic momentum. However, shifting to a domestic driven economy faces several major challenges. One core issue is the lack of yuan appreciation. A stronger yuan would boost purchasing power and support domestic demand, but China has historically kept the currency weak to maintain export competitiveness. The IMF has criticized China's low inflation and artificially weak yuan for increasing export dependence and worsening global trade imbalances. Another obstacle is the weak social safety net. High medical costs, education expenses, and inadequate retirement protection cause Chinese households to save rather than spend. Even if the government stabilizes housing and boosts income, rebuilding consumer confidence will take time, especially given high household debt and uncertainty about future living costs. Wage and labor market issues also pose challenges. Domestic demand growth requires rising household income, but higher wages would increase production costs and weaken China's price competitiveness in manufacturing, potentially reducing exports and straining the broader economy. It remains unclear whether Beijing is willing to bear this long-term trade-off. Chinese companies and foreign investors hold mixed views. Some acknowledge that China's low consumption ratio gives room for growth, but they also emphasize that high saving tendencies make it difficult for China to shift quickly to a consumption-driven model. Ultimately, consumption rises not merely because policies encourage it, but because consumers feel stable, secure, and optimistic about the future. In conclusion, China's declaration of a domestic demand driven growth strategy represents a significant turning point that could reshape not only China's economy but the global economic landscape. Key pillars include stabilizing the housing market, boosting consumption, expanding fiscal spending, and increasing investment. Yet major unresolved issues remain, including yuan appreciation, social security reform, and labor market restructuring. China is expected to push strong policies next year, but results will take time, and the impact will likely ripple across global markets, including Korea. This has been Daily Summary News. Thank you for watching.